All right, welcome everyone. I think we've got a good amount of people here. Thank you for coming to today's webinar, where we're going to be discussing navigating money conversations, specifically surrounding family. This can be a bit of a taboo subject, mostly for the reason of that we typically don't talk to our family much about money and specifically our own personal finances. But today we're going to be talking about a few different relationships in everyone's life or some people's lives. And specifically, what are the things you want to keep in mind when talking to these people about money? We're going to go through a couple of different relationships. Maybe not all of them apply to you. But what you'll find is that if it's not a sibling that you're talking to, maybe it's a friend that is so close to you, they're like a sibling. So as we go through, I just want to remind you, we do have a question and answer section down in the controls below on Zoom. So if at any point you have a question, feel free to fire it into that Q&A. I'll either get to it right when I see it, or depending on if I'm going to answer it later or if it just isn't the right time, I might answer it more towards the end. But yeah, I hope you guys kind of enjoy going through this with me. So the first thing that I want to point out is there's a lot of different relationships that you may want to talk about in terms of, hey, this is some help I may need, or something that we need to talk about, specifically surrounding your personal finances. What are those relationships? So they may be a spouse or a partner. That's usually a pretty, I don't want to say easy conversation, but it's an early conversation generally. The other relationships that you have in your life could be children. Not all of us have that in our lives. I don't certainly, but you want to start talking to them about their finances early on. Parents, talking to them, especially as they get older, about their finances. And last but not least, surprisingly enough, and maybe not surprising to some, talking to your siblings. Or you can also insert other categories in here, such as, like I said, a close personal friend who may be someone like your power of attorney. So we're going to go through these different relationships, but I want to frame each of these conversations for you because we almost have titles for each one of them. The first conversation is between you and your spouse or partner, and this is generally an alignment conversation. So I know that a lot of people will say, talking about money early in a relationship is key to success in a relationship. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that conversation looks like and what are some key things to remember there. Then we're going to start talking about the education conversation, and some of actually the dangers of the education conversations and how you can safely start talking to your kids about money from a young age. The protection conversation. So this is really going to be about how are you making sure that your best wishes are being protected, even if you aren't around to see them through. So that's usually conversations you're having with parents, siblings, could be other people in your life. And then last but not least, the legacy conversation. So this is typically a conversation that's between adult children and aging parents. Um, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth on this one because, this conversation can happen in either direction. And my hope is that by being on this webinar, you'll see the importance of it. And no matter where you are in that life cycle, whether you're the adult child or you're the parent, you'll take it upon yourself, the initiative to say, I need to sit down and have this conversation with you. Okay. Why are we talking about this? So there's a quote that I love that our CEO Charlie says. I called him before this and said, "Hey, where did that quote originally come from? Because come on, you didn't come up with it." And he said it was actually his grandfather who came up with this quote. But he often says, "There's no substitution for daily preparation." The reason that you want to have these conversations ahead of time is that there is always going to be a factor of too late. It's kind of the sad underlying reason that we're having these conversations right now is that, look, life has a lot of twists and turns in it. Things happen, diagnoses happen, death happens, just changes in financial circumstance happen. And so You want to prepare the people in your life and yourself to be set up for financial success later by just having these conversations. Some of them can be quick conversations. Other, like in the case of children, might be lifelong conversations that you're going to have. So preparation is the key to success. Hopefully today I'll prepare you for a few things that you'll be able to take to these people in your lives. The first conversation is really the conversation you're going to have with the partner in your life. Now, one of the things that I think we typically do when we're talking about money is we jump immediately to the dollars and cents. All right. We say, all right, this is where the 401k is. This is how much I save a month. But really the answers are for those questions are less important than what are the values that we share? What is the vision we have for our life in terms of what this money that we're earning is going to be able to do for us? So some of the things that you're going to want to talk about right off the bat is what's your attitude towards money? I think one of the most powerful questions you can ask is, how has, when you were being raised, growing up, how did your family treat money? You don't ever want to assume, oh, well, I know that my spouse had a lot of money growing up, so obviously they know a thing or two about money. Maybe they don't. There's a lot of families that don't talk to their kids about money. So having an idea of, how are you raised around money? And then the vision. The vision is really about what do we want out of our lives? You could go and get really hard answers like this, like, hey, I foresee not living where we live right now, whether it be we're starting a family here and there's a great school system or something, and that's why we're here now. But I don't want to live here long term. A lot of us, and me included, live in New England, and I can't tell you how many people after this winter are probably going to come say to me, yeah, I'm ready to get out of here. So those kinds of vision conversations, what do we want our kids to have? Do we want them to have all the resources in the world in terms of buying them the nicest things? Or is it more important for us to stock as much money away because we believe college is really important or technical school is really important? What is the vision in terms of how we see our life going? Is someone really is it important for someone to say, hey, I really would like to not work, if possible. I foresee myself to being more of a homemaker role, or I'd like to step into volunteering rather than working, the 9 to 5. These are the kinds of things you want to establish early in a relationship because it'll cause so much less conflict down the road. Now, in terms of values, this is really about, hey, are we charitably inclined? Are we going to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, but then try and give to the world or the community? Are there important groups or foundations that we want to get to, whether it be a church or a foundation that, helps children or something like that? These are the things you just need to get on the same page about, and it'll make every other conversation you have about money a lot easier. You'll have a North Star. Some of the things you're also going to want to think about is the who's who conversation. A lot of people, and I imagine most of the people on here have a financial advisor. They also have lawyers in their life, or they have accountants in their life. You want to make sure that any one of these people has a relationship with both people in the relationship. So with, both spouses or both partners, so that they know, hey, should something happen to me, you already have a great relationship with this person. You won't be nervous to go to that first meeting. It'll make a transition, an unfortunate transition, a lot easier later. The other things definitely to establish early, and this can change, and people do it in so many different ways, but what's the division of labor like? So when we're talking about division of labor, what we're really talking about is what parts of our financial life am I in charge of? Some people say, hey, this partner is going to take care of all of the bills, and this partner is going to watch the bigger ticket items. Like, do we have the correct insurance? Do we have life insurance? Do we have um, our investment accounts set up correctly, beneficiaries? Maybe you want to divide those things. Maybe you want to do it all together. Everyone has their own way of doing it, but you want to have clear roles of who's taking care of what, so that way you can hold each other accountable. Like, hey, did you pay the bill for this? The credit card bill? Yeah, I paid it. Good. Great. Let's move on. One thing that we highly suggest to all couples, especially if there is a division of labor rather than doing everything together, is something like a quarterly check-in with each other around finances. I know some people have done, we're going to do a financial date night, right? We're going to talk finances for, an hour and a half. We're going to look at our plan. We're going to make sure we're on the right track, see if there's anything that's changed that we need to talk about. And then after that, we're going to go out to dinner, or we're going to cook our favorite meal, or get a ton of Chinese food via Uber Eats. This is a great way for you to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. I can say for myself and plenty of other people that I know that sometimes you really think you told someone about something, and you think, oh, yeah, I told them about that. And then 3 months later, you find out, oh, wait, you never told me that thing. Um, just today, I said to my girlfriend, "Hey, I'm getting on a webinar in a little bit." She said, "You didn't tell me you were doing a webinar." I was like, "Oh, yeah. I guess I really thought I did tell you." So the quarterly check-in is a great way to, reconnect, say, "Hey, let's make sure we still understand where everything is. We still have the same insurance. We still have the same life insurance. We still have the same investments. Has there been any changes?" It's just a great way to stay in touch. I think the other thing that's not on here is really, we talked a little bit about it with vision, but how are we going to talk to our kids about money? So when you're talking to kids about money, the first thing I want you to understand, there's a psychological term called financial enmeshment. Enmeshment. I'm going to probably blow it a few more times on that word. Enmeshment. Financial enmeshment is a psychological term that refers to when you share too much about your financial situation with a child who is not able to understand those concepts yet. Really, what we're talking about is that we all know that sometimes managing finances can be stressful. And also when things change, right? The loss of a job happens, or we, have a significant expense out of nowhere. These things can be slightly stressful. And the one thing that you need to take away when talking to children about finances is you don't want to talk about the problems or the issues you may be facing in terms of your financial situation, because what you're really doing is introducing stressors into their life that they're not emotionally prepared to deal with. And the long-term effect of this is, quite honestly, it will have a lasting effect into adulthood about how they think about money. Some people, uh, they're told, they're telling their kids, well, we have tons of money, and, we can buy whatever you need and all that stuff, and, never worry about money. Well, that can translate later into life of financially irresponsible adults, because, they've always in their entire life been told, oh, there's always enough money. There's always enough money. So you don't want to introduce that kind of thing, and you also don't want to do it on the other end of the spectrum. Hey, we're really struggling right now, where we can't afford this, we can't afford that, because it could lead to a lot of stress in that child's life that they will carry into being adults that are overly frugal, won't spend any money on themselves even when they need to. So it's just a term that I want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Don't overshare your personal finances with children, especially under the age of 18. Some of the things that we always try and talk to clients about, and we encourage them to talk to their kids about, is it's nice to start early in terms of introducing finance as a general term to kids. So what's a good example of this? Preparing for college. How are we going to prepare for college? Well, maybe we'll talk to our kids, in later high school when they're a little bit more mature. They're starting to understand how the world works a little bit, about, hey, this is what the cost of college is going to be. This is what we're willing to contribute. So there's going to be some that you may need to contribute. We're happy to help you work through how you're going to get that done. It's a safe way to say, this is what it sets a boundary, this is what we're spending, and we're open to talking to you about how you get there. I think the best way to start talking about finances, though, is going to be the first job finances. Some people say, well, start giving an allowance and then you can start talking about, a little bit of money goes in this bucket and a little bit of money goes in this bucket and a little money goes into this bucket. And I think that works. I think at an earlier age, the concept's a little bit more abstract, but once your child starts getting to that 15, 16 years old and they start getting their first job, they're super excited because they're about to get a paycheck. That's a great time to start talking to them about maybe the most important thing in all of financial planning, cash flow management. It's a great time to start talking to them about, hey, how much are you going to save with this money? Hey, let's go through your pay stub. Let's look at taxes. So that way you can understand what we're talking about at the table or in general when people say, oh, taxes. Yeah, all my money is going to taxes. You want to be able to walk through that with them because then they're going to start to understand, oh, now I know why my paycheck is not what I thought it was going to be. Well, it's a little bit lower because you have to pay some taxes on this money. And also, I think it's great to start laying out, we're asking you to do some savings. You're going to have to pay some taxes. This is all really not fun, but there's another part of this, which is you work and therefore you get the rewards of working, which is money for maybe fun things. Set aside some money that's going to go towards the going to the movies this weekend if people still go to the movies and not just watch Netflix. Or hey, you really like Chipotle? That's great. Why don't you start setting some money aside so that way you can go when you want to go to Chipotle and you're not hitting me up for a little Chipotle money? Cash flow management, when kids get their first job, is one of the best ways to introduce them into this is how the world works. You got to manage finances in a certain way. A little bit more on cash flow planning. I think this is a really good layout. And yes, someone asked, are we going to get a link to this presentation after? You will, so that way you'll be able to see all of this. But a great way to talk about cash flow planning is looking at these major areas, funding an emergency reserve. I think that there's a little bit of uh, willingness to go spend money on fun things and forgetting that, hey, if I'm not around, someone else is going to have to put the new tires on your car, and that someone else is you. You need an emergency reserve in case something happens. Budgeting, hey, you need to set aside not just enough money for emergency reserve, but you have future goals, don't you? And start talking to them about what those goals are. You want to go to college. Later this year, you have prom. Who's going to pay for the limo? It's going to be you. So, you better start saving for that now. How do we save for that? Well, let's look at it. You've got this much money coming in. This is how much you can put in a savings account and just walk them through the process. Managing debt. This one's a little bit of a sticky one, but I think that some people out there may have given their children a emergency credit card. This is a way to introduce them to debt, right? But I think that it really ties into more so the emergency reserve. Like, hey, you have this card in case of emergencies, but you better have an emergency reserve so you can pay us back should you have to run up a little money on the credit card because your car broke down. Automated savings, ongoing tracking, these are all things you can walk through with your kids once they start getting that income. Um, the the thing about when you have these kids is, you're starting to talk to them about finances, but they're still young. You got to protect them. And so that's where the protection conversation really comes in. I know this is going to seem pretty odd to be talking to your siblings about money or talking to your parents about money, especially if you're in that sandwich generation. You're taking care of kids, your parents are a little older, but not, to the point where you're too worried about them and their health. But you don't have to have a conversation that has financial details. So when you're talking to your parents and your siblings in the protection conversation, it doesn't need, once again, to be about dollars and cents. In fact, it's almost better that it's not. What it really should be about is roles and responsibilities. So one of the first things we tell new parents, right, is, hey, I understand you're really excited and all that, but there is some homework for you right away. And that's updating your will because guess what? There's a new person around that you need to be taking care of, right? And you need to figure out who's going to be the guardian of those children. You have to have the conversation first. I can't imagine the scenario where you find out all of a sudden, hey, I'm supposed to be the guardian to some children that I never thought I was supposed to be in charge of. So you want to have the conversation, and usually it's best to ask the person that you would like to be the guardian for your kids and say, you know what, hey, I've got, this kid. I'm really happy about it, but I find that you are such a responsible and caring person. I think that you would make a great guardian should the worst happen to me. I know it seems insane if you're in your early 30s thinking, oh, I need to start planning for if I pass away, but this is the time to do it. This is the time to prepare, is say, I want to make sure my kids are taken care of in a responsible way. I'm going to make sure I have a great guardian for them should something happen. Other things, power of attorney, you know, say you're a single parent or say, it's just maybe you haven't started a family, you don't have another person in your life who's your partner. You still need someone who's going to be able to step in should you become incapacitated, whether through illness or some other unfortunate accident. If you are unable to pay your bills, you need someone else who is able to use the money that you have to pay your bills because hopefully you come out of this and you don't want to come out and say, oh, wow, I haven't paid off my credit card in 3 months and it's a lot more than I thought it was when I first, got sick or whatever it is. So talking to powers of attorney and saying, hey, this is what I'm asking you to do. Are you okay with that? Trustees. This is also important. Guardians, trustees, they may not be the same people. Power of attorney trustees may not be the same people. Talking to a trustee and saying, hey, I'm setting up a trust. Maybe it's for a nephew or a niece. And, because I haven't had children of my own. And as their parent, I would like you to be the trustee. You got to have that conversation so that you can get a good sense of do they understand the responsibilities ahead of them. I also encourage you to talk to parents, siblings, these other people in your life who might need to step in at some point about the breaking case of emergency, right? Hey, by the way, everything that you need in my life is in a safe somewhere, or it's in a safety deposit box somewhere. You want to tell them where things are, like the power of attorney. They're not going to have it. You'll know where it is, but if they need the power of attorney, you might not be able to tell them where the power of attorney is. So it's really important to tell them, hey, these are where the keys to the kingdom are. You have a safety deposit box. Here's the passwords to my garage, to get into the house because you might not be able to find the key. Um, this is how you get into my safe. I know it seems a little unsafe to tell people the password to your safe, but the truth is, if you feel unsafe telling that person, a power of attorney, for example, what the key combination is into your own safe, well, they might not be the right person to be your power of attorney. Last but not least, people to call. This is very similar to what I was talking about with the alignment conversation. You want to make sure that the power of attorney, let's just use them as an example because they're probably the most frequently used. You want to make sure that you talk to the power of attorney about, hey, I've got these guys at Monaco, or gals at Monaco. They're the people that you need to call should anything happen to me. I have a lawyer who has all my estate documents. You just need to call them and they'll be able to provide those for you. Um, Here are my kids' doctors. Maybe you don't give them a list and ask them to remember it. It's probably a little bit better to write these people down and put it right next to the other documents that they need to get to. These conversations, by having them up front, will cause or will create a much smoother transition should anything happen to you in the meantime. Okay. So this, like I said, is probably the most frequent thing that we are talking to clients about, which is having the conversation between adult children and elderly parents and really saying, hey, this is what I need you to do should anything happen. Too often we find that people haven't prepared ahead of time and talked to adult children, or maybe even looked at their beneficiaries recently. They might not even know where the money's supposed to go should they pass away. You want to at least every couple of years be looking at this and making sure that your wishes are still in place. But more important than that, you want to start talking to your adult children and saying, hey, these are my lifestyle wishes. Where do I want to be? Who do I want to be with? If something were to happen and I needed some extra care, maybe it is. I'd really like to have you take care of me. Are you capable of that? And if not, then I need to start exploring other options. Another thing that comes up sometimes, hey, I really don't want to be in this kind of facility or this kind of home. I hear that every day. If that's the case, then you need to tell that to your kids before you're not able to communicate it to your kids and start working on a plan ahead of time. One thing that we do here at Monaco, and you can just ask your advisor about it, is something called a family love letter. You may have heard about this in other communications. Uh, Ginny Thompson, our COO, and I sat down and talked about this, and there were some recordings on LinkedIn. The family love letter is essentially a document that lays out a lot of the things we are talking about here and here, right? It's going to lay out who are the power of attorney, who are the important key players in our financial life, whether it be here's our estate lawyer, here's our accountant, here's our financial advisor, here's, you know, I don't know, your mailman. Here are the people who are going to have a really big impact should anything happen to us. But also, it has other things in there like, hey, this is how I want you to think about the money that you're receiving from me. Start having the conversation now. If you want your money to go to charity, yes, we can put it in charitable vehicles, but you may want to say to people, hey, this was, or you may want to put in a family love letter, this was an important organization for me in my lifetime. The other thing, just in general, in terms of the family love letter, is do the people in your life, specifically your adult children, do they know what kind of end of life celebration you want to have? Do they know what kind of music you want at the funeral? Do they know what church you want this to be held at? Is it the church I go to every day, or is it the church from my hometown from years and years and years ago? These are things that you want people to know. It's a hard thing to have the conversation. So sometimes it helps to have something like a document in place that you can leave with an advisor or leave with an estate planner and say, if something were to happen, I want you to give this to my family so that they understand what we need to do or what they need to do. A lot of things are redundant here, and I apologize for this, but when you're talking to your adult children about things, as you're kind of thinking about what the future looks like, make sure that they know what their role is. Hey, this person is my healthcare power of attorney. The other person is my durable power of attorney. You know, this is the executor of my estate. I can't tell you how many times clients pick someone to be the executor of their estate. And they did it because they were like, oh, I'm sure this person would do what I need them to do. But that person that they've selected has so much going on in their life that they're not the best person to execute their will. They don't have the time. They're raising young children, or they have a job that demands so much from them that they won't have time to communicate with lawyers, go to the probate court. They won't have time to do this. So you want to make sure when you select these key players in your life that you're actually talking and asking them beforehand. You don't want to blindside anyone with, hey, by the way, I understand you're going through all this, but here's this 6 month long process that you're going to have to slog through for me. It's always good to just talk to them beforehand. A key thing I wanted to make sure I talked about was documents. Now, estate documents, we tell people you want to update them at least every 5 years, 7 years at the latest. I mean, if you can do it a little bit closer to 5 years, that would be better. The reason is that when you think about, I'll take a very common example, a power of attorney document. A power of attorney document is a great document to have. Everyone should have one. That document won't be accepted by some institutions if it's over 5, 7, 10 years old. So, you think about, oh, when my kids were born, I did all my estate documents. Don't need to think about it again. That's going to possibly present an issue. We at Monaco, we try and get people to update them every 7 or so years or just recertify them because you want to make sure that any power of attorney document that you have is going to be accepted as soon as it needs to be. You don't want to have to go back to a lawyer and try and get it recertified if something were to happen. You want to be able to say, yep, pull the trigger, the power of attorney is now turned on. I'm going to skip forward a little bit here. We also want everyone to have a healthcare directive. We talked about trustees, we talked about guardians. Make sure you talk to these people beforehand, and then they'll feel more prepared for what's coming. One of the things you'll notice that we didn't talk about through this entire presentation is really hard numbers, right? What does the estate planning process look like? How do I make sure that I'm not going to pay any extra in taxes or that I'm setting my beneficiaries up in the best way? There are many things that you can go through, whether it be gift planning, estate tax planning, exemption versus exclusion, revocable trust, as well as irrevocable trust. And if you have questions on these, your financial advisor is more than prepared to answer those questions. But we talked about money only at the end here. These things that we're talking about, they're really just emotional conversations about this is what I need from the people in my life. And I need them to know that one, I trust them, but two, these are my wishes and I need them to fulfill them. So when you're going through this process, and hopefully there's a few takeaways you took from this. If you're an older parent, it's time to start talking about adult children. Um, I want you to really be thinking about the fact that if you don't know how to handle it or how to start the conversation, all of the people that have worked in Monaco over the years, we've all had a lot of experience doing this. I have experience doing this. Every advisor has. The wealth management team has sat in on conversations about this. These people, we've all gone through it. So we can be really good resources when you say, hey, I need help picking who should be my power of attorney, who should be my trustee. How should I start talking to my kids about money? We've done it, and we're happy to help you through that process. I do want to go back one slide because there's something important that I missed here. Often the conversation between adult children and elderly parents, it's almost easier when the elderly parents initiate the conversation. I think that sometimes adult children feel a little pushy or maybe feel a little uncomfortable going to their parents and saying, hey, have you figured this stuff out? Some things that you can think about in starting that conversation would be really do all this for yourself first. If your parents are, someone who might be a key role later, maybe they're the guardian of your children should you pass away, talk to them about that and say, hey, I sat down with my financial planner, or I listened to this fantastic webinar with a very handsome guy talking to me, and he said that I needed to get my will straightened out, my powers of attorney set up, and that I should start talking to my advisor about whether I need to start being worried about trust or gifting. If you start the conversation, if you're that adult child and say, this is what I'm doing, it's almost much easier to say, I'm preparing. Have you prepared? And is there anything I need to know about your personal financial wishes? You know, maybe you don't start with money. You just say, hey, what do you want to happen? If something were to happen to you, would you be really upset if you were in like a nursing home environment? Would you prefer that you lived with me? I'm not sure we could swing that, whatever it is, but you want to talk about the things you're doing to your parents so that they know that you're preparing. And then it's almost the easiest thing in the world to just say, by the way, have you guys prepared? What did you guys do when you were younger? And what are you doing now? So keep that in the back of your mind. It's a really tough conversation to have, but I think it's an incredibly, incredibly important one to have. Okay. So I just fired away for, what are we talking, 36 minutes now, and I'm sure you're sick of hearing my voice at this point. But does anybody have any questions? I saw one which I answered live, which was you will be able to see this webinar at a later date. But if you have any questions, I encourage you to put it into the question and answer section at this time. And if not, that's okay too. This is a great question. So the question was, does it ever make sense to do a joint meeting with parents and kids? This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say rely on your advisor if you need to. I think that having a joint meeting, with the parents and the kids, especially in that uh, elderly adult and young adult, relationship, can be really, really impactful. That way, the people who are going to take over, should anything happen to you, or if you're going to be the person taking over, you get to meet the key players of who you need to know. Hey, these are the people here at Monaco. They manage all of our assets right now. They know where the insurance policies are. They know they have copies of the will. They have copies of the power of attorney. These are people you can rely on. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. It's also great because if they meet us and they start to understand what we do, one of the things we're going to talk to them about is, with you in the room saying, hey, we've done this before. We've gone through clients who have passed away and we've helped them through that time. One thing that we've done at Monaco is we've created a very comprehensive executor checklist. And that executor checklist, it's going to take you through basically every aspect of what you need to do as an executive, as an executor. So, it's going to say, hey, did you remember to turn off the credit cards? Did you remember to pay the water bill because you still have a house that you need to take care of? Is the heat on in the house? You know, do you have the codes to all the phones? Things like this. It's going to remind you of all of these, and we can be great partners in walking people through this. This is a great question here. Um, Can you give an example of a bad conversation with a 16-year-old in a contrast with what is a good one? This is a great question. So, an example of a bad conversation would be, I think if you start going into your own personal finances, like, hey, we can't pay for that because we need to save for, college. And, because you want to go to college, it's going to be really expensive. So no, I can't do that for you. A better conversation is, hey, that's something that you want. That's a goal. That's a goal for you. So, you've got a job or maybe you have an allowance. Why don't we talk through what are some of the saving strategies you can put together so that you can get that? You can't get it right now. That happens. Sometimes you need to save up for things, just like, we do. We save up for things, but you don't want to introduce your finances into the conversation. You really just want to say, oh, you really want that object. That's great. Say it's I use the example of going to prom, right? You want to go to prom at the end of this year. We're so happy for you, but we're expecting that you're going to contribute a little bit to it because it is for you, and it's something that you need to earn. So why don't we talk through how you're going to be able to do it? And I'm happy to have that conversation with you because I've had to do the same thing my entire life. As soon as you start introducing, well, your mother and I can't afford that, or my partner and I, yeah, we can't afford that, we're not going to do it that way. You're starting to introduce the possibility of financial instability into a kid's life early, and you don't want to do that. I hope that answers your questions, but I'd be happy to talk more about it at any point. You'll see my email and phone there. Um, My daughter is graduating and starting her first job this summer. Do you have any resources? We do have some resources. I think that a great place to start is some budgeting, which we have quite a few budgeting tools at our disposal. I think one of the things that would be a good resource is your financial advisor. So, all of us here at Monaco, we love to help not just our clients, but we love to help our clients' families. So, just this past year, I had a client who said, "Hey, my daughter's in college. Would you mind talking to her for 30 minutes or 15 minutes and just introducing yourself, kind of start talking her through what managing finances is like?" We can be a great resource for things like that. I really enjoyed that conversation because it's a fresh mind to mold around, oh, you want to talk about financial planning, my favorite subject. I'm ready to talk about it. So, yes, there's some budgeting resources out there, but don't forget that we're a resource too. It doesn't take a lot for us to have a 15-minute conversation with, someone who's starting their first job or, just got out of college. Good question. Okay. I think I got them all. All right. If you do have any lingering questions, you didn't put them into the chat here, maybe you can take a screenshot. I'm also on the website if you want to do it that way, but feel free to email any questions that you might have. Deirdre, I believe, just said in the chat here, the webinar will be on the YouTube channel for Moneco Advisors. It's a great thing to share with other people in your life. If you really, really don't want to have these conversations, send them a link, and have them watch this webinar. That'll maybe make the introduction of the subject a lot easier. But as I said, if you have any questions, reach out to your own advisor, reach out to me. We're happy to help. All right. Thank you, everyone.